Jordan is one of the 4 driest countries in the world, and climate change has hit the kingdom's agriculture sector. Farms use more than 65% of its water supply. Jordan is a landlocked country except at its southern border. It has only one river, and its main source of water is rain, but that has been scarce in the past 2 decades. So to gather clouds, the Jordanian government has collaborated with German rainfall technology company.
We depend on satellite images and radar images to monitor weather conditions and formulate forecasts, so that through these forecasts we can determine when we will operate and where we operate at these locations.
WeatherTech is teaming up with environmental consultancy Al Qudra to implement the project.
Scientifically, there is proof that the quantity of rainfall and its annual average is shrinking in demand for water due to immigration in Jordan and the crisis in the area. So the demand has doubled and the sources of water are shrinking, be it groundwater or rainfall. So there is a great need for fresh water.
And that may slowly be met. Between May and July, the company induced rainfall 5 times, and this could almost double by the end of the year. The technology relies on several factors such as humidity and wind to work properly.
كيف يا كيف وضع يا لطيف كيف مي كيف رطبة كيف كيف كان مجمع عنا كيف أيوة هالعماد الشيخ هاي والعين المي حرام كيف أنت
Gulf News takes a closer look at the scientific process of cloud seeding in the UAE and what it all means. Over the last few years, the NCM was able to give Mother Nature a helping hand with some science and accelerate the annual rainfall with its cloud seeding project. The UAE was one of the first countries in the Arabian Gulf to adopt cloud seeding technology. The program initially began at the end of 1990, but by the end of 2000, the fully fledged project was carried out in cooperation with a number of organizations and institutes, including the US space agency NASA. It's now standard practice for the NCM's cloud seeding section to use a sophisticated weather surveillance radar, or WSR, which is responsible for monitoring the atmospheric pressure around the clock. Cloud seeding missions can only be carried out with cumulus cloud formations, so once they're identified, the NCM will quickly launch aircrafts carrying salt crystals mixed with magnesium, sodium chloride and potassium chloride that are shot into the skies. The salt crystal flares then encourage the formation and release of cloud moisture, which then turn into
لا إله إلا الله الحمد لله ما في أحد باقي السيارات ما هي مشكلة صبر يا شيخ دقيقة الحمد لله على كل حال احنا سالمين والحمد لله ما شاء الله تبارك الله ما شاء الله
population growth. How do you expect this to be addressed?
Well, the population growth issue at the global level, it's not that daunting. That is, the population percentage-wise is growing slower today than in the past, and so it will actually peak out. The problem is that the population is growing the fastest where people are less able to deal with it. So very poorest places that you're going to have a tripling in population by 2050. And so their ability to feed, educate, provide jobs, stability, protect the environment in those locations mean they're faced with an almost impossible problem. Northern Nigeria, Yemen, Chad. And so what we need to do is take this aid generosity and this innovation and go into those places. Whereas in the richer countries, you're often at a stable point of which is 2.1 or even less. And so it's really an acute problem in a certain number of places, and we've got to make sure that we help out with the tools now so that they don't have an impossible situation later.
And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists on this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
Essentially, he's a dictator, and he's there not to help, but to make people poorer, more dependent.
Well, Bill Gates is actually continuing the work of Monsanto, because Monsanto had so many movements, and we held a tribunal on Monsanto. A buyer bought up Monsanto, but when Bill Gates pours money into Africa for feeding the poor in Africa and preventing famine, what's he doing? He's pushing the failed green revolution, he's pushing chemicals, pushing GMOs, pushing patent, now pushing new...
Knowingly, or he thinks it's a good thing and he may be wrong?
Well, there's
it's not the same thing.
There's enough evidence of what it does. There are enough letters to him from farmers of Africa, from governments of Africa to say, this is not the way to go. The United Nations accepts agroecology, working with ecological systems as the best way to go. Now, Bill Gates is trying very hard to shift the patenting issue now. At every agency, Bill Gates is still imposing and forcing GMOs, which is a failed enterprise. And he's not just imposing GMOs, he's taking what has failed and rejected by governments. My government threw the BT aubergine of Monsanto out. Bill Gates resurrects it in Bangladesh. We rejected the gold records, how he financed DivSeek. I've talked about how he's pirated seeds we have saved that tolerates salt and floods, and he says invention. This biopiracy is a bit like Columbus, where Columbus is supposed to have discovered America, when he basically went as a pirate.
So what exactly is the deal? What will the UK gain and lose? Well, the first to go next year will be the single market and the customs union. But the UK will be able to find new friends, negotiate new global trade agreements. EU regulations go out the window. For example, GM food companies like Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, aren't allowed to develop or sell new genetically modified products in Europe or the UK. Brexit could change all that. Well, the biggest